Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the entrepreneurial mindset. Get yourself started in the entrepreneurial process. This is what we are looking next. Now we know entrepreneurs act differently because they face the uncertainties. Main question is right now how to mitigate the uncertainties. So what is really the entrepreneurial way? We've looked at what large corporations do, and they do use scenarios and then they come up with a plan and they have a focus on planning and prediction. Entrepreneurs do it differently. They have a focus on themselves, on skills, knowledge, and own resources. And we quoted Michael Dell over and over again. And this is where Sarah Saraswati comes into place again, because she looked at 27 expert entrepreneurs. And she found out that these expert entrepreneurs have a different approach in decision making, in thinking and acting when they face those very special uncertain situations. And these entrepreneurs said a lot of interesting things like, I never do market research because I don't believe in the results. They can't predict what's happening in the future. The same like Michael Dell said before. So what did Sarah's really find out? How do entrepreneurs think and act in the uncertain situations? She came up with a process how entrepreneurs really think and act. And it starts with the means. And so they start with their own situation. They ask themselves, who am I? What do I know? And who do I know? So how far can I by myself get with my idea? What are the steps I can make? And this is what you can ask yourself too. So you can ask yourself, what are you able to do? Do you know someone who can help you in going further and so on? So you don't start, as we said before, in the established process with predicting the goal, because you can't predict the goal. You start with yourself and say, okay, what am I able to do in this specific situation? And every one of you can ask that question to yourself. So that's the first step Sarah has described in her entrepreneurial process. And by assessing yourself, you know how far you can get. So you ask yourself, what can you do? How far can you get? And this is basically your goal. This is where you can get to. And if you can't get further, you start interacting with people you know, with other people. You start talking to so-called potential stakeholders and try to get stakeholder commitments. So you try to get commitments from others which can help you stepping further. And this is what entrepreneurs do, and if they do that, they get a commitment by other stakeholders in order to step further. They gather new means, but also they build new goals because those stakeholders might have different goals. And then you go over and over that process again and again and again and again. So what entrepreneurs basically do, you might call it to some way a trial and error process. Also, it's not really a trial and error process because you're a lot more in control of your process. You always start with your everyday situation you're in right now. Then you start thinking about how far you can get. If you can't get further, you commit others into your stakeholder quilt and you step further together with the others. And if you do it over and over again, then you create your company. But you not only create your company, you co-create your company, but also the markets and the products. So you basically create everything at the same time, but you are in control of what you're doing. And that's the main difference to an untriggered trial and error process. And if we, for example, look into the lean startup process later on, we will see that the lean startup process with the learning issues implemented in the lean startup process can help you very, very much in remaining in control and executing exactly this entrepreneurial process. But this is basically the result of the study of the 27 entrepreneurs. And now I'd like to look further into the specific steps. First of all, differentiating the approach from large companies and entrepreneurs in total in 5 dimensions. So what do entrepreneurs in this process do differently from large corporations? The first question is, how do they view, or which view of the future do they have? Large companies have this focus on prediction. They have to predict because they have to coordinate their companies with the help of plans. And this is what they do. They analyze the data of the past and they forecast, and then they come up with scenarios and they build their plans. And this is also a good way to do in stable environments. Even in a little unstable environments, then you can try to hedge your risks. However, when it comes to uncertainty, and this is when you go from there to there, you have to be in control. This is the only thing you can do. You can't predict your future. You have to start with yourself, and you have to go stepwise into building your company, your market, your products, but you have a focus on control. You always want to remain on control. And if you look at entrepreneurs that were really successful, the one thing they have in common, they were always in control of what they were doing. So entrepreneurs have this focus on control, and by that they consider the environment, the company, the market as shapeable. That's the difference to large companies. They predict the market and they find a way for themselves into that market. The second one is the question, what's the basis for action? And the basis for action for large companies is the goal orientation. They start with the goals. It might be strategic goals, it might be operative goals for the next 1 to 3 years. They are goal oriented. When it comes to uncertainty, you can't predict the goals. So what you have to do, you have to be means oriented. You have to start with yourself, with your preferences, with your knowledge, with your networks, and your goals are unspecified in the first moment when you assess yourself. So this is the difference in orientation. The third dimension is the view of risk and return. If you can predict a goal, then you can calculate an expected return. And most of the decisions in large corporations are based on some return logic. So return on investment, return on sales, return on whatever. So they want to build a return logic and then decide on specific projects, whether they will follow up with these projects, and they basically compare returns. And in a stable environment, again, this works out very well. If you can't predict goals and you can't predict returns, then you have to start a different way. And how do entrepreneurs do that when it comes to uncertainty? They start with themselves and they start with the question, what am I willing to lose? The affordable loss. And we saw that in Michael Dell's example, it was a low affordable loss. It was $1,000 plus his own commitment. But it's not really much. Leonard Schoen started with $5,000. Actually, he didn't have more, which also tells you that you can start with a low amount of money, but if you commit stakeholders over time, you can build a large corporation. And this is also what you can see in that entrepreneurial process. What you also do in that sense is you restrict your downside potential. And this is also the reason why many entrepreneurs say it's not about taking big risks. It's about an affordable loss, which I will determine, and this could be considerably low, but I restrict my downside potential. And only if I have learned enough in the next step, I go on executing this business. The fourth dimension is the attitude towards outsiders. So how do you look at outsiders? actually, as a large corporation, you do a competitive analysis. So you look at what outsiders do, you look at the market, you look at their strategies, and you try to find yourself a space between competitors and customers. This is, if you can predict the market, predict what happens in the future, a good way to do. However, as an entrepreneur, you do it differently. You go further, but if you can't step further because you didn't commit more losses, for example, you try to take on partnerships. It could be capitalists. It could be other partners which help you doing the next step. So what you basically do is you commit partners who contribute several means, but not only means, they also change your goals. Remember the process we just saw on the slide before. So that's the fourth difference. And the fifth difference is the attitude towards contingencies. What is when something unexpected happens? As a large corporation, you try to avoid surprises. You remember the BASF quote from Jürgen Hambrecht, the CEO, concerning the oil price. And he talked about unexpected things, and he would have liked to avoid these surprises. He would have liked to stick to his forecast. So they try to hold their course of action. You as an entrepreneur, if you see something unexpected happening, you try to leverage that. You try to leverage contingencies. You try to make the best out of exactly that situation. If Airbnb cannot get into the market because others are against them, like the hotels, or regulation is against them, they try to find ways to do it differently. And this is what you do as an entrepreneur. You try to incorporate external information the best way possible. So basically you start loving surprises because they can give you new ideas and new ways of coping with these challenges. And this is why entrepreneurs can cope with uncertain situations a lot better than non-entrepreneurs are able to do. Now, this is the main entrepreneurial process. Sarah's discovered, and she did not only discover that, but she also described that many of the entrepreneurs, like Leonard Schoon, like Michael Dell, followed this process. Also, this process wasn't described by that time. And you see that there are 5 dimensions where this process differs from what non-entrepreneurs do. And this is why you can learn to be an entrepreneur if you follow that process, if you remember these 5 dimensions. And this is why we'd like to go further now into that process to really understand it.